What is strategy? We hear it all the time. Be more strategic, think more strategically, act more strategically. But what the heck does that even mean? Especially now with AI changing everything, I believe strategy has never been more important to understand and to actually execute over the long haul, because it's just something AI can't do if you think strategy equals thinking, which is a hypothesis that I have. So when Seth Godin came out with this book called This is Strategy, probably a year plus ago, I was immediately interested. I've read 5 or 6 of his books, and all of them have been so good, even the ones that are a little bit outside of marketing, whether that's the Icarus, Deception, or any of the other ones that are his thoughts around life, which just really bleed into marketing. But this one was different. But before I get too far into it, run the intro. Welcome to On Marketing, a show where we uncover what marketing is. I won't tell you what to think. I'll help you improve how you think about marketing and life. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. This was originally recorded on October 14th, 2025. All opinions shared in this podcast are the individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employers or associate organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional marketing or life guidance. Listeners act on the information provided at their own risk. Thank you for being here. Strategy is the hard work of choosing what to do today to improve our tomorrow. Because tomorrow keeps arriving, and perhaps we could choose a strategy to make it better. Those are 2 quotes from the book that I really thought were a great jumping point for what this book is about. Strategy really comes down to making the next day, tomorrow, the next quarter better than the previous or the current one. This is Strategy is a book by Seth Godin, and it's a collection of almost 300 short thoughts or nudges, as he calls them, reframing how we think about creating, communicating, and executing strategy. It's not a how-to, it's more like reading 300 blog entries around a theme: how to choose change, define progress, and align with systems that shape outcomes. Seth Godin doesn't need too much of a bio. He is a super smart thinker in this space that has been around for over 20 plus years. He writes a daily blog, which inspired me to do a daily newsletter for a year and a half. And he is someone who has spoke so much into my marketing perspective. And to be honest, without Seth Godin, I wouldn't be as sharp as I am with marketing. And that's one of the other fun things, is that while so many marketing teachers I came into contact with early on in my journey, I kind of left them, whether that was Gary Vaynerchuk, and I still keep up with him, but it was for a time, and then you grow out of it. Seth Godin is one of those amazing ones, or maybe I was just early to it, but he's an amazing thinker that he just keeps staying relevant. And even through this book, that just was one of the thoughts that I had, was just like, wow, 20 plus books, however many books he's written, every one just seems to be contextually important and relevant and can actually bring value to your work you're doing. So what is in this episode? This episode covers 3 caveats, just context you need before reading or taking in my review, 5 insights or takeaways from the book, and then 3 questions to help you assess where your own strategy stands today. First up, caveats. Caveat number 1, this is one of Seth's worst written books. But when you have a bar as high as Seth, then even an average book can feel like a bit of a letdown. And that's kind of what happened here. And maybe it was the framing of how I stepped into the book. I did not know it was going to be a clutter of thoughts or blog entries or nudges. I thought it was going to be a coherent piece. So that was my first caveat or struggle with the book, was just the fact that there was no chapters. Every nudge was its own chapter. There was no book pages, which drove my mind crazy when trying to take notes. And I think that's just something that's really important to understand, is that it's not that there isn't value here, but if you're looking for a purple cow or the practice, it just isn't going to read like those. The level of clarity is different. It's not worse, it's not better, it's just different. This book is messy, fragmented, and hard to reference later, but still, there are some good ideas. And again, I hope my 5 insights proved that while this book is, you can maybe open it and instantly get some value or turn to a random page, taking it all in is also valuable, so I would still recommend reading it. As Seth says, this is not a book of answers, it's a book of prompts. The key idea is that it's a compilation of thoughts, not a narrative. So don't expect a coherent arc, treat it like short meditations on strategy instead. Caveat number 2 is strategy's core never changes. While the methods in which we might execute the strategy do change with time, with the tools, depending on your industry, the core principles never do. Once you understand strategy at its foundation, what change you're trying to make, for whom and why, the frameworks don't really matter, and actually even when you use them, they just come out better because you're actually understanding what you're trying to do. So whether you're a tech startup or a manufacturer, you'll approach strategy very similarly. Define the progress, define the problem, define who it's for, and define what gets in the way and how do you overcome that. This is one of the truths the books does a good job of pulling out, that strategy evolves in application, not in essence. The methods change, the principles don't, and as you deploy your strategy, as you execute it, you will learn things that should make you pivot. So that is a thing, is that the strategy's core is true and likely will never change, but how you do it does. Caveat number 3 is this isn't a beginner's strategy book. As much as I said at the beginning there that you can just open it up to any page, I think the challenge with this book that I quickly found is that without reading all of Seth's other books and without reading Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Ramelt, there was so much that I wouldn't have been able to piece together or pull down from Seth's high level of thinking to the ground of like, what does this actually mean? So this is not strategy 101. It's more like strategy 301 or 401. So without background, a lot of these nudges or meditations will feel abstract or honestly very incomplete, which is why I also suggest reading a few of them, not just one, because they will tie together slightly. But again, if you haven't read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, or any other strategic books, I would definitely recommend doing that first. But it's not necessarily bad. Just know that this book assumes, or Seth's level of thinking assumes, that you have a decent grasp in this space. So if you don't run away. Dive into it, but just realize you might want to grab a few other books that touch on strategy just so you can fully paint the picture. The key idea is, while you could read this only after other strategy books, I still think there's some things within it that are additive. So while you need a foundation, you can still read this book to either build some of that or add on top of it. Now, those are the caveats. Now to the fun part, 5 key insights or learnings from the book. Insight number 1, really, you take away what strategy is and what it is not. And the clearest way to define that is to separate strategy from tactics. I was listening to someone and they said strategically and tactically in the same sentence. And I'm like, those are literally antithesis to each other. Like, you can't be strategic and tactical. Like, the strategy leads to doing tactics, but they are not one and the same. Strategy uses tactics to achieve its goal, but it's not a list of things you're going to do. Strategy first starts with defining the problem, defining the progress. What's the change being made and for whom? The tactics and the hacks and the execution methods all support the strategy, but they're not the strategy. The full plan, the framework for how progress gets made, that's strategy. As Seth says in the book, I hate saying that. Most of what people call strategy is simply a wish list. And then also, it's easier to have a meeting about our mission statement than it is to get serious about choosing, and the key word here, and persisting with a strategy. I think that is a bigger thought, that strategy only really works with compounding, which means you have to stick with it. You have to persist. You might pivot, you might change, but again, you have to put the strategy in place and execute it for a long time. Key idea, stop calling a to-do list strategy. Strategy is the thinking that informs the doing. Insight number 2 is systems lead to progress within the strategies. Every strategy lives within a larger system: incentives, culture, structure, feedback loops. You can have a solid strategy on paper, but if the system around it isn't designed to support it, you'll fail, or you'll have to use brute force to make it work, which isn't fun and isn't sustainable. The best strategists understand and work within the system, not against it. Systems thinking is what makes progress sustainable instead of temporary. And that's one of the key things that this book touches on, is that some of the best marketers in marketing is done through systems thinking. It's understanding the flow of progress, that your product might be here, but then there's other things. So they might need to get a house, but then further along, there's other progress things they want to do. And you understand that entire system, so then you can build your company's strategy, your product strategy within that. Because every strategy depends on being conscious of the change we seek to make in the systems that can amplify or impede that progress. I love that quote from the book, because as Seth says, small system changes are more permanent and resilient than the more satisfying broad strokes we often embrace. That is so key to strategy, is that sometimes the smallest tweaks within a system can go so far into leading to the progress and the outcomes you're aiming for. Key idea, a strategy that ignores its systems becomes a slog. Build within the system, not outside it, because no matter what, it's already within it. Insight number 3, which builds right on that, is that the best strategies align with reality. I heard this said once that reality bats last. So no matter if you created your strategy in a boardroom where most of them are created over some brainstorming and some great Chipotle or something, it doesn't matter because reality always wins. Reality bats last. So while it can look great in a deck, it crumbles in execution because it wasn't made with reality in mind. And now you might think, Jordan, I'm not just walking around being ignorant to reality. You are right. But the challenge is how are you getting signals and inputs from reality? Not from people who are telling you what you want to hear, but your actual customers in interactions that aren't sales or aren't pressured interactions. So you can just hear, what do they care about? What are they thinking about? That is reality. And so many people are far from that because as much as we say we want to help our customers, we don't actually listen to them. We don't talk to them recurringly. So we're so far from reality. The antidote to this is to co-create with reality. As I just said, talk to your market, observe real buyer behavior, not just what they say, but what they do, and align with what's actually true today and what's coming tomorrow, not what was true 5 years ago or even a month or a year ago. Because traction is always easier when your strategy is aligned with the world you live in, as Seth says in the book, and I couldn't agree more. The key insight, the key idea here is the best strategies are built in collaboration with reality, not isolation from it. Insight number 4, create the right conditions for the minimal viable market to share something, to share your product, to share your service, to share the progress you help them deliver. Because word of mouth doesn't just happen, it's engineered. I read this book by Rob Fitzpatrick, which was called How to Write Good Nonfiction or How to Write Nonfiction. And in it, before you even write your book, he advises to write the recommendation loops or loop that someone will, so you start to think, what's the context of the conversation? What do they say that says, hey, you just said X, I'm going to respond with this book would be great for that. And you start to think through what are the conditions that are needed for your minimal viable market. So there's 2 pieces to this. There's a minimal viable market. It's not everybody. It's a certain amount of people to say the right thing, which is the right condition, so then they say that more frequently. The best marketing strategies make it easy for the right people to say the right things to others. So work backwards. What do you want them to say? Who is most likely to say it? And what conditions would make them or increase the likelihood of them sharing? But a key insight is to focus on that smallest viable market. Who is the few that will talk, not the masses, but who are the few that will talk about your product or service, and how do you create conditions for them to share? I love this quote from Seth. Everyone is shorthand for hope in an unwillingness to see fine systems and strategy. Someone is far more effective. So if you can choose between everyone and someone, Seth is advising you to choose someone. And here is an actionable thing he shares. Overwhelm the smallest viable audience with a solution that creates the conditions for them to take action, and repeat that. The key idea, great strategies build shareable moments for the few who care deeply and let that energy spread outward. Think of any of these running apps or any of these cults that are created. They're not for everybody. Peloton or some of these things, they're only for a certain select few of people. Who is that for you? Finally, insight number 5 is that strategy drives results, but it's also detached from the results. This became clear to me when I was reading a book by Ann Duke, who writes about decision making, and she talks about this concept of resulting. We think that a decision is good or bad based on the result, which she calls as resulting. But the decision is isolated from the outcome. You can have a good decision that has a bad outcome. Doesn't mean it was a bad decision. The world's complex and unpredictable. Strategy should be judged similarly by its logic and process, not by the single outcomes it creates. No offense, but there's probably companies who have grown without any strategy. Does that mean we should all not have a strategy to grow? No. So the key here is to remember that over time patterns will emerge, adjust to those, but don't let one bad result undo your strategic process. Make that strategic process so damn good that even when you have some bumps in the outcomes, you're very confident of, like, we have the process down of how we think strategically. So even if outcomes are swaying, we're not pulled by that, which a lot of companies are. If something good happens, we're going all in on webinars without truly realizing, yeah, that was kind of a context or condition for why that succeeded. And, really, we don't really have a reason to do webinars. But again, you're allowing the outcomes to dictate your strategy. Outcomes are disassociated from the strategy. Focus on doing good strategy, having a good process for it. I like this quote here. This could be from the book. This could not be. I used AI to create it. I'll be completely honest. This outline. So sometimes AI will come up with its own great quotes. But it says, good decisions are worth making even if they don't always lead to good outcomes. And as Seth says, resilient strategies accept and account for luck. They benefit from good luck and are resilient enough to survive bad luck. I love that. The key idea, good strategies are judged by clarity and process, not by luck. Ooh, that's good. All right, 3 questions to contemplate to make this real for you and to make some progress in your marketing. First question, and the most important question, is what is my strategy? If you can't answer this question clearly, everything else becomes random effort. If you don't know what change you're trying to make, how will you know when you've made it? So the first question is can I answer what is my strategy? Question number 2 is, what do I need to walk away from to move towards a better strategy? Many times the only way you get to a really great strategy is releasing the one you were defaulted into or you just has subconsciously accepted as is. The hard work, as Seth Godin says, of developing a better, more resilient strategy begins with letting go of the assumptions and goals you might be holding on to right now. I think that's so important because rarely in strategic planning do we talk about what we're moving away from. I was having coffee yesterday with an executive director, and he said that exact thing, that every year they put it all on the table and nothing is a sacred cow. If something isn't working, bringing joy or bringing energy, they will let it go. So I think that's something that isn't always included. But what do we need to walk away from in this strategic planning process to have a better, more resilient and effective strategy? And then finally, maybe this is the first most important question, I'm not sure, but who is this for? Who is my smallest viable audience or market? You heard me talk about that a lot through the insights, but without a clear who, your strategy has no anchor, and to be honest, it has no flavor. One thing that I constantly realize is that the more niche you get, which is kind of being more specific around who's their smallest viable audience, the more different you could be, the more flavor you can add to your marketing, versus if you're trying to be everybody, reach everybody, then you're going to be very vanilla. So I think that the goal at the start is to attract a few, not perfection for the masses. So whether you're at your start or not, I think this is a good strategy, but especially early on, who are the few that we can get some traction with? And then they bring others along versus trying to get the whole group, the masses, to follow along. So the key idea is the interplay between what your strategy is and who it's for is where all the progress happens. So that's why it's so important to know what is my strategy, but I can't really answer that if I can't answer who is it for. In conclusion, This Is Strategy might not be Seth's best book, but it does hold important reminders and I think touches on a critical thing right now, is that with AI, strategy and thinking has never been more of a competitive edge because AI will never ask you a different question. AI will never say, hey, I think you should be over here. Even though you said you're going to do Y, I think you should be doing Z. They'll just tell you what you want. So if you don't have a good strategy or you haven't fleshed that out, AI, you'll just almost continually go down a bad route versus being able to step out of it. So I believe strategic thinking is so important today and will only increase as AI becomes more prevalent. In reminder, strategy is not a plan. It's not a list of tactics. It's a way of seeing, diagnosing, choosing, and then aligning it with reality. Even if this book frustrated me at times because I couldn't put the exact page number for my quote, it challenged me to reflect on my own strategy and the systems in which I build them in and live in. Because I think it's so easy as fish to forget the water in which you're swimming in. I liked this quote here as a closing quote. Strategy is the story we tell ourselves about how tomorrow will be better because of the choices we make today. Think of your health. Think of financial strategies. It's all about making better choices today for a better future tomorrow. And that's what I want for your business and your career. Strategy is a hard work of choosing what to do today to improve our tomorrow. And that's still one of the best definitions I've found. So thank you, Seth Godin, for sharing that with me. And I hope you go grab yourself a copy and gain all of these great insights on what strategy is and how to do better strategy. Thank you for listening. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post it on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.